A child knocked on my door at 2 a.m. saying, "My mommy won't wake up." When I looked at his hands, I saw the blood. The pounding on my door pulled me from sleep so violently I knocked my water glass off the nightstand. It shattered on the hardwood floor of my bedroom, and through the ringing in my ears I heard it again. Desperate, frantic knocking. I grabbed my phone. 2:17 a.m. My heart was already racing when I stumbled to the door in my boxers and t-shirt, squinting through the peephole. A small boy stood in the hallway, maybe 6 years old. His face was streaked with tears and something darker. His pajamas had cartoon dinosaurs on them. When I opened the door, he looked up at me with eyes that had seen something no child should ever see. His voice came out in a whisper. "My mommy won't wake up." That's when I saw his hands. Both palms covered in blood. Fresh blood. Still wet. The boy standing in front of me was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. I asked him where he lived. He pointed down the hall. Apartment 3F, 3 doors down from mine. I'd never seen anyone come or go from that unit. Never heard a sound. The boy's name was Oliver. He told me this while I was grabbing a towel from my bathroom to wrap around his hands. He said his mommy's name was Rebecca. He said she was on the floor and wouldn't answer when he called her name. He said there was so much blood. I told him to stay in my apartment and I'd go check. He grabbed my arm with those bloody hands and begged me not to leave him alone. I brought him with me, held his hand, the less bloody one, as we walked down the hallway. The door to 3F was already open, just a crack, no lights on inside. I pushed it open slowly. The smell hit me first. Copper and something else, something wrong. I felt for the light switch, found it. The apartment was identical to mine in layout, but completely different in every other way. Toys scattered everywhere. Children's books stacked on the coffee table. A small TV playing cartoons with the volume muted. And in the kitchen, visible from the entryway, a woman lay face down on the linoleum floor. Pool of blood spreading from beneath her. I told Oliver to wait in the living room. He didn't listen. He ran past me to his mother and dropped to his knees beside her. Started shaking her shoulder and crying. I pulled out my phone and called 911. The operator answered on the second ring. I gave her the address and apartment number. Told her there was a woman unconscious with significant blood loss. She asked if the woman was breathing. I knelt beside Rebecca, careful not to step in the blood, and checked for a pulse. Found one. Weak, but there. Her back was moving slightly. Shallow breaths. I told the operator yes, she was breathing but barely. The operator asked what happened. I said I didn't know. A child had knocked on my door. She asked if there was anyone else in the apartment. I looked around. Saw a closed door down the short hallway. Bedroom. I walked over with Oliver following me like a shadow. Pushed the door open. Empty bedroom. Unmade bed. More toys. No one else there. I told the operator we were alone. She said paramedics were 7 minutes away. She told me not to move Rebecca. Not to touch anything. Just keep her comfortable and monitor her breathing. Oliver was sobbing now. Full body sobs that shook his small frame. I picked him up and carried him back to the living room. Sat him on the couch. Asked him what happened. He said he woke up because he heard his mommy making strange sounds. Choking sounds. He came out of his bedroom and found her on the floor. He tried to wake her, but she wouldn't move. He got scared and ran to find help. Knocked on doors until someone answered. That someone was me. I asked if his daddy was home. He shook his head. No daddy. Just mommy. I asked if anyone else lived here. He said no. Just them. I asked if his mommy was sick. If she'd been sick recently. He said she'd been sad. Very sad. For a long time. But not sick. The operator was still on the line asking questions. I answered what I could. Oliver's age. 6.5. Rebecca's approximate age. Early 30s maybe. Any visible injuries. I couldn't tell with all the blood. The paramedics arrived in 5 minutes. 2 of them. A man and a woman. They came in fast with their equipment and immediately went to work on Rebecca. The woman paramedic had me take Oliver into his bedroom while they assessed his mother. I carried him there and sat with him on his small bed, covered with superhero sheets. He wouldn't let go of my hand. Through the open door, I could hear the paramedics talking in urgent voices. Medical terms I didn't understand. They were moving fast. One of them called for police backup. That's when my stomach dropped. This wasn't just a medical emergency. Something else was happening here. Oliver looked up at me with those huge eyes and asked if his mommy was going to die. I told him the doctors were helping her, that she'd be okay. I was lying. I had no idea if she'd be okay. 2 police officers arrived. A younger woman with her hair in a tight bun, and an older man with gray at his temples. They spoke quietly with the paramedics, then came to Oliver's bedroom. The female officer knelt in front of Oliver and introduced herself as Officer Tess Blackwood. She had a kind face, soft voice. She asked Oliver what happened tonight. He repeated his story. Woke up, heard strange sounds, found mommy on the floor, got scared, found help. Officer Blackwood asked if anyone else had been in the apartment. Oliver said no, just him and mommy. She asked if mommy had any friends who visited. He said Aunt Claire sometimes came, but not tonight. Officer Blackwood looked at me, asked who I was. I explained. Neighbor. Oliver knocked on my door. I called 911. She asked if I'd touched anything in the apartment. I said no, just checked Rebecca's pulse. She nodded. Asked if I'd seen or heard anything unusual tonight before Oliver knocked. I said no. I'd been asleep. The paramedics were loading Rebecca onto a stretcher. I could see them through the doorway. She was intubated now, breathing tube down her throat, IV lines in both arms. They were moving with controlled urgency. The male officer asked Oliver more questions about his daddy. Oliver said his daddy lived far away, didn't visit, only Mommy. The officer asked about other family. Oliver mentioned Aunt Claire again, said she was Mommy's sister, lived in Tacoma. The officer asked if Oliver knew Aunt Claire's phone number. He didn't, but he knew Mommy's phone was on the kitchen counter. Officer Blackwood went to get it. Came back with a phone in an evidence bag. She'd need a warrant to access it. Standard procedure. She asked Oliver if he knew his Mommy's passcode. He said it was his birthday, February 18th. She wrote that down. The paramedics were leaving with Rebecca, moving fast toward the elevators. One of them called back that they were taking her to Harborview Medical Center, trauma unit. Officer Blackwood asked Oliver if he had any other family nearby. Grandparents, friends' parents, anyone who could take care of him tonight. Oliver started crying again, said he wanted his Mommy. Officer Blackwood looked at her partner. They had a quiet conversation in the hallway. I heard fragments. CPS, emergency placement, foster care. My chest tightened. This kid had just found his mother dying on their kitchen floor. Now he was going to be shipped off to some stranger's house in the middle of the night. I spoke up before thinking it through. Told them I could keep Oliver for tonight, just until they found his family. Both officers looked at me like I'd suggested something insane. Officer Blackwood asked if I had any prior relationship with the family. I said no, just neighbors. She said that wasn't how it worked. They needed to follow protocol. But her partner pulled her aside. More quiet conversation. They were looking at Oliver, who was still clinging to my hand, looking at the alternative of dragging a traumatized 6-year-old to a CPS facility at 3 a.m. Officer Blackwood came back, said they'd need to run a background check on me. Full criminal history. I gave them my information. Adrian Cole, social security number, driver's license. They called it in, waited. The background check came back clean. No arrests, no warrants, no red flags. Officer Blackwood made a decision. She said I could keep Oliver for the rest of the night. They'd contact CPS in the morning. But I needed to bring Oliver to the station by 9 a.m., and I couldn't leave the city, and they'd need my full statement about everything I'd seen tonight. I agreed. Signed some papers. The officers took photos of Oliver's hands. The blood was drying now, brown and flaky. They swabbed under his fingernails, collected his pajamas as evidence, gave me a paper bag with his clothes inside, said CPS would need them. They were treating this like a crime scene, which meant they thought someone had hurt Rebecca, on purpose. After the officers left, I cleaned Oliver's hands in my bathroom sink. The water ran pink, then clear. His small hands were shaking under the warm water. I found him clean clothes from my dresser, a t-shirt that hung to his knees, sweatpants with the drawstring pulled tight. He looked tiny in my clothes. I made him hot chocolate from a packet I found in my kitchen. He held the mug with both hands and stared at nothing. I asked if he wanted to sleep. He said he couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his mommy on the floor. I turned on my TV, found a cartoon channel. We sat on my couch together. Oliver eventually leaned against me and fell asleep around 4 a.m. I stayed awake, watched the sky lighten through my window, thought about Rebecca lying in a hospital bed somewhere, thought about what had happened in that apartment, the blood, the way she'd been positioned, face down, like she'd collapsed while standing at the kitchen counter. At 6 a.m., I called Harborview, asked about Rebecca's condition. They wouldn't tell me anything. Patient privacy laws. I wasn't family. I asked if I could at least know if she was alive. The nurse said she couldn't confirm or deny the presence of any patient. I hung up frustrated. Oliver woke up around 7 a.m., looked confused about where he was, then remembered, started crying again. I made him breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast. He picked at it, barely ate. I tried to think of what to say to a traumatized 6-year-old. Came up empty. Around 8 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. It was a woman who introduced herself as Diana Shepard from Child Protective Services. She'd been contacted by the Seattle PD about Oliver. She needed to speak with both of us. Could I bring him to the CPS office downtown instead of the police station? I said yes. She gave me the address, told me to be there by 10 a.m. I got Oliver dressed in his own clothes from the evidence bag. The pajamas were gone, but there was a day outfit underneath. Jeans, a striped shirt, sneakers. We took an Uber to the CPS office, a gray building that looked like every other government building. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, plastic chairs in the waiting room. Diana Shepard met us there. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, wore glasses and had her dark hair in a professional bun. She took us to a small interview room, asked Oliver questions, the same questions everyone else had asked. What happened last night? Who was home? Any other family? Oliver answered robotically, like he'd memorized the responses. Diana asked about school. Oliver said he went to Madison Elementary. 2nd grade, Mrs. Frost's class. Diana wrote everything down. Then she asked me questions. How I knew the family. I explained again. Neighbors. Never met before last night. She asked why I'd offered to keep Oliver overnight. I said because he was terrified and needed stability. She said that was kind, but also outside protocol. Diana explained what would happen next. Oliver would be placed in emergency foster care while CPS investigated the situation. They'd try to locate his father, find other relatives, determine if Rebecca would recover and what her condition was. They'd need to assess whether Oliver was safe to return home, whether there had been any abuse or neglect, whether Rebecca's injuries were self-inflicted or caused by someone else. The police were investigating, treating it as a potential crime scene. Diana said this process could take days or weeks depending on what they found. Oliver started crying when he heard foster care, said he wanted to stay with me. Diana looked uncomfortable, said that wasn't possible. I wasn't a licensed foster parent, didn't have clearance. Oliver grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go. Diana tried to gently separate us. Oliver screamed. Full panic attack, hyperventilating. I knelt down and told him it would be okay, that these people would take care of him, that his mommy would get better and they'd be together again soon. More lies. I had no idea if any of that was true. Diana called in another social worker, a man named Gerald who looked like he'd been doing this job too long. He had a gentle way with Oliver, convinced him to let go of my hand, promised Oliver he'd be staying with a nice family who had other kids, that he could bring his favorite toys, that they'd visit his mommy in the hospital soon. Oliver finally relented, walked away with Gerald, looked back at me once before disappearing down the hallway. I felt like I'd just abandoned him. Diana said I could go, but she'd be in touch if they needed anything else. She thanked me for helping Oliver, said not everyone would have gotten involved. I left the building feeling hollowed out, got an Uber back to my apartment, stood in the hallway outside 3F, yellow police tape across the door, crime scene, do not enter. I went back to my apartment, showered, changed clothes, called in sick to work. Couldn't focus on anything except Oliver's face when he'd looked back at me. Around noon, my phone rang. Officer Blackwood. She had questions. Could I come to the station for a formal interview? I said yes. Took another Uber, third one today. I was racking up charges. The police station was busy, phones ringing, people in handcuffs, chaos. Officer Blackwood met me in the lobby, took me to an interview room. This one had a camera in the corner, recording. She said this was standard procedure. I wasn't a suspect, just a witness. She needed my statement on record. I walked through everything again, the timeline, what I'd seen, what Oliver had said. She asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about Rebecca, any signs of trauma before the blood. I said she was face down. I couldn't see her face or front of her body. Officer Blackwood said that was probably for the best. I asked what that meant. She said she couldn't discuss an ongoing investigation, but off the record. She was surprised I'd kept it together as well as I had. Most civilians didn't handle trauma scenes well. I asked if Rebecca was alive. Officer Blackwood hesitated, then said yes. Barely. She was in critical condition, induced coma. The doctors were working to stabilize her. I asked what happened to her. Officer Blackwood said they didn't know yet. They were waiting for toxicology reports, blood analysis. Crime scene investigation was still processing the apartment, but early indicators suggested it wasn't an accident. Someone had hurt her, or she'd hurt herself. Either way, it was bad. I asked about Oliver. She said CPS had him in a safe placement. I asked if they'd found his father. She said they were working on it. Rebecca's phone had been accessed. They'd found contact information for a Claire Brennan in Tacoma, Rebecca's sister. She was on her way to Seattle now, should arrive by evening. I felt some relief at that. Oliver would have family, someone who knew him, loved him. Officer Blackwood asked if Rebecca or Oliver had ever mentioned anything to me. Any problems, threats, suspicious people? I said no. We'd never spoken. I didn't even know they lived there until last night. She asked if I'd heard any arguments, loud noises, anything unusual in the past few weeks. I thought about it, realized I had heard something, about a week ago, late at night, shouting, a man's voice, then silence. I'd assumed it was from a different apartment. Sound carried weird in this building. Officer Blackwood wrote this down, asked if I could identify the voice. I said no, just knew it was male, angry. She asked what time. I said around 11 p.m. maybe. She asked what day. I tried to remember. Last Wednesday, 6 days ago. She made a note, asked if I'd heard anything else, any other disturbances. I said no, that was it. She thanked me, said I could go but I should remain available. They might need to ask more questions. I went home, sat in my apartment, stared at the wall, couldn't stop thinking about Oliver, about Rebecca, about that pool of blood. Around 6 p.m. I decided to go to Harborview, just to see if there was any news. The hospital was massive, trauma center for the entire region. I asked at the front desk about Rebecca's condition. They still wouldn't tell me anything. I wasn't family. I said I was the one who'd found her, the one who'd called 911. The desk clerk said she appreciated that but couldn't help. Privacy laws. I was about to leave when I saw a woman rushing through the lobby. Dark hair, red eyes from crying. She looked like Rebecca. Same facial structure, same slim build. I approached her carefully, asked if she was Claire. She stopped, looked at me with suspicion and grief mixed together, asked who I was. I introduced myself, explained I was the neighbor who'd helped Oliver. Her expression softened. She thanked me, said she'd just arrived from Tacoma, was trying to see her sister. They wouldn't let her up to ICU yet. Some kind of police restriction. Claire was shaking. I suggested we sit in the lobby. She agreed. We found chairs near the windows. She said CPS had called her at 5 a.m., told her Rebecca was in critical condition, that Oliver was safe, but in emergency placement. Claire had thrown clothes in a bag and driven straight here. She'd tried calling Rebecca's phone. No answer. The hospital wouldn't tell her anything over the phone. She'd driven 90 minutes in a panic. Now she was here and they still wouldn't let her see her sister. I asked if she knew what happened. She said no, just that Rebecca was injured, unconscious. The police were investigating. She asked what I'd seen. I told her what I could without traumatizing her further. Found Rebecca on the floor. Called 911. Oliver had been scared but physically unharmed. Claire started crying. Said she'd been worried about Rebecca for months, ever since the separation. I asked what separation. Claire said Rebecca had split from Oliver's father 8 months ago. His name was Derek Morse. They'd been together since college, married for 7 years. But Derek had become increasingly controlling, possessive. Rebecca finally got the courage to leave, filed for divorce, got a restraining order, moved into that apartment to start over. Derek was supposed to have supervised visitation with Oliver, but he'd violated the restraining order twice. Showed up at Rebecca's apartment, banged on the door, screamed threats. Both times Rebecca called the police. Both times Derek was arrested but released within hours. The justice system didn't take restraining orders seriously. Not until someone got hurt. Or killed. Claire's words hung in the air. I asked if Derek knew where Rebecca lived now. Claire said yes. He'd found her somehow, despite her changing her phone number, despite being careful. He always found her. That's what men like Derek did. They hunted. Claire asked if I'd told police about Derek. I said I hadn't known to mention him. But the police had Rebecca's phone. They'd find his information. They'd question him. Claire said she hoped so, but wasn't optimistic. She'd watched the system fail Rebecca over and over. Judges who gave Derek chance after chance. Cops who treated domestic violence calls like nuisance complaints. A society that protected men like Derek until their partners ended up dead. She said that with such bitterness, I knew she'd been through this before. With Rebecca, watching her sister suffer, unable to help. I asked about Oliver. Had Derek ever hurt him? Claire said not physically, but the psychological damage was there. Oliver had nightmares, anxiety. He'd started therapy 2 months ago, was finally making progress. Now this, whatever this was, it would set him back years, if he ever recovered at all. A nurse approached us, said Claire could see Rebecca now, but only for a few minutes, and she needed to prepare herself. It was bad. Claire stood on shaky legs, asked if I'd wait. She didn't want to be alone after. I said yes. She disappeared down a hallway with the nurse. I sat in the lobby for 45 minutes, watched families come and go, people crying, people praying, people staring at phones, hoping for good news. Claire came back looking worse than before, sat down heavily, didn't speak for a long time. Finally said Rebecca was unrecognizable, swollen, bruised, machines everywhere, breathing tube. The doctors said she had severe internal injuries, damage to vital organs. They'd performed emergency surgery, but the prognosis wasn't good. Even if she survived, there would be permanent damage. Brain, liver, kidneys. Claire's voice cracked. She said it looked like someone had tried to kill her sister, methodically, violently. I asked if the police had said anything. Claire said a detective had been waiting outside Rebecca's room, had asked her questions about Derek, about their relationship, about the restraining order. Claire had told them everything. We sat there together, two strangers bonded by tragedy. Around 8 p.m., Claire said she needed to go see Oliver. CPS had arranged a visit at the foster home. She asked if I wanted to come. I said yes immediately. We took her car, a beat-up sedan that smelled like coffee and stress. The foster home was in Ballard, a nice neighborhood. The house was small but well-maintained. Toys in the yard. A kind-looking woman in her 50s answered the door, introduced herself as Patricia, the foster mother. She led us to the living room where Oliver sat on a couch with 2 other kids. A girl about 10 and a boy maybe 8. Oliver saw Claire and ran to her, threw his arms around her waist, started sobbing. Claire held him and cried too. Patricia ushered the other kids out, gave us privacy. Oliver asked where his mommy was. Claire knelt down, told him mommy was very sick. The doctors were helping her, but she might be sick for a long time. Oliver asked if mommy was going to die. Claire couldn't answer, just held him tighter. Oliver saw me standing by the door, asked why I was there. I said I wanted to make sure he was okay. He said he wanted to go home, wanted his mommy, wanted things to be normal. Claire promised they would be, someday, but right now he needed to be brave, needed to stay with Patricia. She was nice, the other kids were nice, and Claire would visit every day. Oliver asked if he could stay with Claire instead. She said she'd asked, but CPS said no. She lived too far away, worked full-time. Her apartment was too small. The system had rules, stupid rules that didn't account for the fact that Oliver needed family, needed someone who loved him, not strangers. We stayed for an hour, played board games with Oliver, tried to act normal, like his world hadn't just shattered. When it was time to leave, Oliver cried again, begged us not to go. Patricia gently pulled him away, said she'd make him special pancakes for breakfast, anything he wanted. Oliver didn't care about pancakes. He wanted his mother. Claire drove me back to my apartment. We sat in her car outside my building. She thanked me for everything. Said most people would have called 911 and walked away. Wouldn't have gotten involved. I said Oliver needed help. Anyone would have done the same. She said I was wrong. Most people wouldn't have. She gave me her number, asked me to call if I heard anything. About Rebecca, about the investigation, anything. I promised I would. She drove away and I went up to my apartment, walked past the yellow tape on 3F, stood outside my door, realized I'd lived here for 3 years and never once checked if my neighbors needed help. Never introduced myself, never built community, just existed in my small bubble. And now a woman was dying 3 doors down. Her son was traumatized and displaced, and I'd been completely oblivious until a child knocked on my door covered in blood. The next morning, I woke up to my phone ringing. Detective Philip Garza, Seattle PD. He needed to speak with me. Could I come to the station? Again. I went. Same interview room, same camera recording, but this time the energy was different, more intense. Detective Garza was older than Officer Blackwood. Hard face, tired eyes. He'd seen too much. He asked me to go through my statement again. Every detail. What time Oliver knocked, what he said, what I saw in the apartment, how much blood, where it was located, whether I'd touched anything, moved anything. I answered everything. Again. He asked about the male voice I'd heard arguing. When, exactly? What was said? Could I identify any words? I said no. Just angry shouting. Too muffled to make out specifics. Detective Garza asked if I'd seen anyone entering or leaving 3F in the weeks before this happened. I said no. Never paid attention. He asked if I'd seen Derek Morse around the building. Showed me a photo on his phone. A man in his mid-30s, dark hair, square jaw, looked normal, harmless. I'd never seen him. Detective Garza leaned back, said they'd picked Derek up for questioning yesterday evening. He'd been at work when Rebecca was injured, had a solid alibi. Security footage at his workplace showed him there from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. He worked third shift at a warehouse in Tacoma, 35 miles from Rebecca's apartment. No way he could have been there. Derek claimed he hadn't seen Rebecca in weeks, was respecting the restraining order, had no idea she was hurt until police showed up at his job. He'd seemed genuinely shocked, concerned even. But something wasn't right. Derek's demeanor shifted when asked about the divorce, about custody. He'd become defensive, angry, said Rebecca was trying to poison Oliver against him, that she was unstable, had mental health issues, was probably doing this for attention, trying to frame him. Detective Garza said Derek had a history, 2 previous domestic violence complaints from former girlfriends before Rebecca. Charges dropped both times, women too scared to testify, but the pattern was there. I asked if Derek was in custody. Detective Garza said no, couldn't hold him without evidence. His alibi was solid. Unless forensics found something connecting him to the scene, they had to let him go. He'd been released this morning, was already back in Tacoma. Free. I felt anger rising. Asked how that was possible. Rebecca was barely alive, Oliver was traumatized, and Derek was just walking free. Detective Garza said that's how the system worked. Innocent until proven guilty, even when everyone knew better. He said the crime scene unit had found something interesting, though. Couldn't tell me details. But there were elements that didn't add up. Rebecca's injuries suggested a sustained attack, but there were no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds on her hands, no evidence of a struggle. It was like she'd just stood there and let someone hurt her, or hurt herself. But the injury pattern didn't match self-infliction either. It was a puzzle. And they were missing pieces. Detective Garza asked if I'd be willing to testify if this went to trial. I said yes. Absolutely. He said good, because something was very wrong with this case. And they needed all the help they could get. I left the station feeling frustrated, got an Uber home. My phone rang on the way. Claire. She'd just gotten a call from the hospital. Rebecca had taken a turn for the worse. Multiple organ failure. They were doing everything they could, but it wasn't looking good. Claire was heading back to Harborview now. Asked if I could meet her. I redirected the Uber. Met Claire in the same lobby where we'd sat yesterday. She looked destroyed. Said the doctors had given Rebecca 48 hours. Maybe less. They'd asked about organ donation. About advanced directives. Rebecca had never discussed what she'd want. Never imagined she'd be in this position at 32 years old. Claire had to make impossible decisions. I asked about Oliver. Did he know? Claire said no. How do you tell a 6-year-old his mother is dying? We sat in the hospital chapel. Empty, except for us. Claire talked. Said Rebecca had been the strong one growing up. Always confident, independent, had big dreams, became a nurse, loved helping people, met Derek in college. He'd seemed perfect at first. Charming, attentive. But after they got married, things changed. He became jealous, controlling, wouldn't let her see friends, monitored her phone, accused her of cheating constantly. Rebecca kept it hidden for years, ashamed, thinking she could fix him, thinking it was her fault. When Oliver was born, Derek got worse, saw Oliver as competition for Rebecca's attention, would fly into rages over nothing, break things, punch walls, never hit Rebecca or Oliver directly, but the threat was always there, hanging in the air. Rebecca finally left after Derek pushed her down the stairs, She'd been pregnant, miscarried. That was the breaking point. She filed for divorce, got the restraining order, tried to build a new life, and now this. Claire said she blamed herself, should have helped Rebecca leave sooner, should have reported Derek, should have done something. I told her this wasn't her fault, this was on Derek, and on a system that failed to protect Rebecca. Claire said the system was designed to fail women, to give men infinite chances, to prioritize fathers' rights over mothers' safety, to treat domestic violence like a private family matter instead of the crime it was. She said Rebecca had done everything right, documented everything, called police, got a restraining order, left, built a new life, and still ended up here, dying at 32, leaving behind a 6-year-old son. Claire's phone rang. The hospital. She answered. Her face went white. She stood up. Said they needed to come now. Rebecca was crashing. We ran through the hallways, made it to ICU. A team of doctors was surrounding Rebecca's bed. Code blue, alarms blaring. They were doing chest compressions, pumping medication, shocking her heart, trying to bring her back. Claire and I stood outside the room watching through glass, helpless. After 20 minutes, the doctors stopped. One of them walked out, pulled off his mask, said he was sorry. Rebecca was gone. Claire collapsed. I caught her, held her up. She was screaming. No, no, no. Nurses came, tried to comfort her, lead her to a private room. I followed, sat with her while she called family, her mother, Rebecca's friends, everyone who needed to know. Each call was agony, repeating the news, hearing people break down. Claire eventually asked about Oliver. How would they tell him? The hospital social worker said CPS would handle it. They had counselors trained for this. But Claire insisted on being there. He needed family, needed to hear it from someone who loved him. The social worker agreed to arrange it for tomorrow morning at the foster home. Claire needed tonight to process, to figure out what to say, how to tell a 6-year-old that his mother was never coming home. I stayed with Claire at the hospital until midnight, helped with paperwork, arrangements, the practical, horrible details that come with death. When we finally left, I drove her to a hotel near the hospital. She couldn't drive herself, couldn't be alone. I got her checked in, made sure she had food, my number, said I'd come with her tomorrow to tell Oliver. She didn't argue, just nodded. I went home, lay in bed, stared at the ceiling, thought about Rebecca, about Oliver, about Derek walking free, about justice that would never come. I called Detective Garza, left a voicemail, asked what happened now that Rebecca was dead. Was this murder? Would Derek be charged? I needed to know this wouldn't be swept away. Another statistic, another woman dead at the hands of someone who claimed to love her. Detective Garza called back at 7 a.m., said Rebecca's death changed everything. This was now a homicide investigation. Medical examiner was performing an autopsy. Toxicology was rushed. They'd know more in 48 hours. He said Derek had an alibi, but that didn't mean he wasn't involved. Could have hired someone. Could have orchestrated it remotely. They were looking into his finances, phone records, known associates, building a case. But he needed me to understand. This would take time, months maybe. And even then, conviction wasn't guaranteed, especially with Derek's alibi. I asked about Oliver. What happened to him now? Detective Garza said CPS would determine placement, probably with Claire since she was next of kin, unless Derek fought for custody, which he might, out of spite, out of control. The system would have to consider his rights as the father, even if everyone suspected he'd killed Oliver's mother. I picked up Claire at 9 a.m. We drove to the foster home in Ballard. Patricia met us at the door. Her expression said she already knew. CPS had informed her. Oliver was in the living room, playing with toy cars, innocent, unaware. Claire sat beside him. I stood in the doorway. She started gently. Said Mommy had been very, very sick. The doctors tried very hard to help her, but sometimes even doctors can't fix everything. Sometimes people are too sick to get better. Oliver looked confused, asked when he could see Mommy. Claire took his small hands, said Oliver wouldn't be able to see Mommy anymore. Mommy had died. She was gone. Heaven now, with the angels. Oliver stared at her, processed, then started shaking his head. No, Mommy's not dead. She's at the hospital, getting better. Claire tried to hug him. He pushed her away, screamed that she was lying, that Mommy was fine, that he wanted to see her, that everyone was lying. Patricia tried to help. Oliver threw a toy car at the wall. It shattered. He ran to his temporary bedroom, slammed the door. We heard him sobbing through the walls. Claire started to follow. Patricia stopped her, said Oliver needed space. This was normal grief, denial, anger. He'd cycle through it all. They needed to let him process, give him time. Claire was crying, said this was wrong. Oliver shouldn't be here, with strangers. He should be with family. Patricia said she agreed, but there were procedures. CPS would evaluate Claire as a potential guardian, but it could take weeks. Forms, background checks, home visits, and Derek would be notified, would have the right to contest, to fight for custody, Claire said, over her dead body. Derek wasn't getting Oliver, not after what he did. Patricia said carefully that Derek hadn't been charged with anything, was presumed innocent. The court would have to consider his parental rights, unless evidence proved otherwise. We stayed at the foster home for hours. Oliver eventually came out, didn't speak, just sat on the couch, stared at nothing. Claire tried talking to him. He wouldn't respond, wouldn't look at her. Shut down completely. Patricia said this was trauma response. Dissociation, normal under the circumstances. He'd need intensive therapy, support, time. Claire asked if she could take Oliver for the day, just to get him out of the house. Patricia said no, not without CPS approval. Claire argued. Patricia stood firm. Rules existed for a reason, even painful rules. We left around 4 p.m. Claire was furious, said this was kidnapping. They were holding Oliver hostage. I tried to calm her down, reminded her that Patricia was just doing her job, following protocol. The real enemy was the system. And Derek. Claire said she was going to fight, hire a lawyer, get emergency custody, do whatever it took. I said I'd help however I could. She dropped me off at my apartment, drove away to start making calls. The next few days were a blur. I went back to work, couldn't focus, kept checking my phone for updates. Claire texted constantly. She'd hired a family lawyer, was filing for emergency guardianship, had submitted to background checks, was preparing her home for Oliver. Detective Garza called on day 4, said the autopsy results were in. Rebecca had been poisoned, massive dose of insulin, enough to send her into hypoglycemic shock, cause organ failure, death. The insulin had been injected, not ingested. Someone had deliberately administered it. Rebecca wasn't diabetic, had no medical need for insulin. Someone had injected her with intent to kill, but there was something else. The injection site was on Rebecca's inner thigh. Hard to reach yourself, not impossible, but unlikely. And there were no other injection marks. No evidence of previous attempts. Just one massive lethal dose, administered precisely, professionally, like someone knew exactly what they were doing. Detective Garza said they'd searched Rebecca's apartment again, found an insulin vial in the back of the bathroom cabinet, behind cleaning supplies, wrapped in a plastic bag. Fingerprints on the vial belonged to Rebecca. Only Rebecca. No one else. They'd checked. Derek's prints weren't there. No other person's prints. Just hers. Which meant either Rebecca had injected herself, suicide, or someone had been incredibly careful, wore gloves, made it look like suicide. Detective Garza said Rebecca's medical records showed no history of mental illness, no suicidal ideation, no previous attempts. She'd been in therapy after leaving Derek, working through trauma, but her therapist said she was making progress, planning for the future, excited about Oliver starting 2nd grade. This wasn't consistent with someone planning to die, but they had to consider all possibilities. The investigation was ongoing. They were looking into where the insulin came from, who had access. But without physical evidence connecting Derek or anyone else, this might be ruled as suicide. Case closed. I asked about Oliver. Would he be told? Detective Garza said eventually, when he was older. For now, CPS was treating this as suspicious death pending investigation. Derek had filed for custody, was claiming Rebecca's instability. Her suicide proved she'd been unfit, dangerous. He was Oliver's father, had rights. The court would decide. Claire was fighting back, but the system favored biological parents, even terrible ones. I felt sick, asked what I could do. Detective Garza said nothing unless I remembered something new, some detail I'd forgotten. I said I'd think about it, ended the call, sat in my apartment, replayed that night over and over. Oliver knocking, the blood on his hands, Rebecca on the floor, the pool spreading, the smell. Something nagged at me, something wrong. I couldn't place it. I called Claire, told her about the autopsy, the insulin, the fingerprints. She said it was impossible. Rebecca would never kill herself, would never leave Oliver. Someone did this, someone smart, someone careful, someone who knew exactly how to make murder look like suicide, someone like Derek. Claire said Derek was a pharmaceutical sales rep, had been for years, had access to medical supplies, insulin, syringes, new dosages, knew how to inject, knew how to kill, but he had an alibi, was at work, miles away. Claire said he must have hired someone, paid someone. There was no other explanation. I asked if she'd told this to the police. She said yes, they were investigating, but without proof, it was speculation. Derek's finances showed no unusual transactions, no payments to suspicious individuals. His phone records were clean. If he'd hired someone, he'd been careful, covered his tracks, left no trail. Claire said her lawyer was filing emergency motions, requesting supervised visitation only for Derek, citing the restraining order history, the suspicious death, but the judge would probably allow some contact. Derek was the father, had rights. Claire's voice broke. She said Oliver was getting worse, wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, barely spoke. The foster home was trying, but he needed family, needed her. The system was moving too slowly, forms and procedures while a 6-year-old suffered. 2 weeks passed. The court granted Claire supervised visitation with Oliver. Once a week, 3 hours, at the CPS office, under observation. It was insulting, but better than nothing. Derek was granted the same. Claire attended every visit, brought Oliver's favorite foods, toys from home, photos of Rebecca, tried to maintain connection, keep memories alive. Derek attended twice. Both times brought expensive gifts, video games, remote control cars, things a 6-year-old would love. But Oliver barely reacted, didn't want Derek's gifts, didn't want Derek, would sit in the corner during visits, refused to speak. Derek would get frustrated, accuse CPS of turning Oliver against him, claim parental alienation, say Rebecca had poisoned Oliver's mind. Claire wanted to scream, to tell Derek exactly what she thought. But her lawyer advised silence. Let Derek show his true colors. Let the system see who he really was. The custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after Rebecca's death. Claire's lawyer prepared everything. Character witnesses, Rebecca's documented history of abuse, the restraining orders, police reports, Derek's previous complaints from ex-girlfriends, therapy records showing Oliver's trauma response to Derek. But Derek had his own lawyer, expensive. Good. They prepared too. Painted Rebecca as unstable, suicidal, unfit. Said she'd kept Oliver from his father out of spite, that Derek had been trying to rebuild their relationship, that he loved his son, wanted to provide stability, said the suspicious death was tragic, but not Derek's fault. That without evidence of foul play, the court should focus on Oliver's best interests, which meant being with his father, his biological parent, not with an aunt who lived an hour away, worked full-time, had no children of her own. The hearing lasted all day. Testimonies, evidence, arguments. I attended as a witness, described that night, what I'd seen, what Oliver had said. Derek's lawyer asked if I'd seen Derek at the scene. I said no. Asked if I had any evidence Derek was involved. I said no, just suspicions. Suspicions weren't facts. The judge listened to everything, asked questions, reviewed documents. At the end of the day, she said she needed time to deliberate, would issue a ruling within a week. Claire left the courthouse devastated, said she could feel it going the wrong way. The judge was leaning toward Derek, toward biological rights, toward keeping father and son together, despite everything, despite common sense, despite the dead mother whose killer was still free. I tried to reassure her, said we didn't know what the judge would decide, had to wait. Hope. Claire said hope had died with Rebecca. Now there was only fear. Fear for Oliver. Fear of what Derek would do once he had full custody. No supervision, no oversight. Just a traumatized child and the man who'd probably murdered his mother. The judge's ruling came 6 days later. Joint custody. Claire would have Oliver during the school year. Derek would have summers and alternating holidays. Supervised visitation for Derek for 6 months, then reassess. It was a compromise. Solomon splitting the baby. Neither side happy, but the court's decision was final, unless new evidence emerged, unless something changed. Claire called me crying, said at least Oliver would be with her most of the time, away from Derek. But summers terrified her. 3 months alone with Derek. Anything could happen. I asked about the police investigation. Any updates? Claire said Detective Garza had called yesterday. The case was going cold. No new evidence. No witnesses. No confession. They'd interviewed Derek extensively. He'd never slipped. Never revealed anything. Maintained his innocence, his grief, his shock at Rebecca's death. Without proof, they couldn't charge him. Couldn't arrest him. Couldn't stop him from getting custody. The case would remain open, but inactive, unless something broke, some new lead, some revelation, but those rarely came. Claire picked up Oliver from foster care 3 days later, brought him to her apartment in Tacoma, enrolled him in a new school, started therapy twice a week, tried to build a life for him, for both of them. She quit her job to be home more, found remote work, did everything she could to help Oliver heal, but the damage was deep. Oliver had nightmares, panic attacks, separation anxiety, refused to sleep alone, would wake up screaming for his mother. Claire would hold him until he cried himself back to sleep, then lie awake, wondering how to help a child process this kind of trauma, how to explain that his mother was gone, that the man who'd probably killed her was his father, that the world was unfair and cruel, and justice was a myth we told ourselves to feel safe. 6 months passed. Oliver was doing better, slowly. His therapist said he was processing, beginning to accept. Still had a long way to go, but progress was real. Claire called me occasionally, updated me, said Derek's supervised visits had ended. Judge granted unsupervised, 2 weekends a month. Claire had to hand Oliver over, watch Derek drive away with her nephew, not know if he'd come back, live with that terror every time. So far, Derek had been model father, picked up and dropped off on time, called Oliver between visits, sent cards, acted like nothing had ever happened, like Rebecca had never existed, like the restraining orders and arrests and suspicious death were all misunderstandings. Claire said Oliver came back from Derek's quiet, withdrawn, would take days to open up again, to feel safe. Then it was time to go back. The cycle repeated, breaking him a little more each time. I went on with my life, work, apartment, routine, but couldn't forget. Would pass 3F in the hallway. New tenant moved in last month. Young couple. No idea what happened there. Probably better that way. I'd think about Rebecca sometimes, about Oliver, about the blood on his hands, about how close he'd come to losing both parents in one night, how he'd still might. Summer was approaching. Derek would have Oliver for 3 months, unsupervised, unmonitored. Claire was terrified. Her lawyer filed motions to limit the summer custody. Judge denied. Court order was clear. Derek had rights. The calendar marched forward. June 1st. Summer custody began. Claire dropped Oliver off at Derek's apartment, cried the whole drive home, called me from her car, said she didn't know if she'd ever see Oliver alive again. I told her Derek wouldn't hurt his own son. She said Derek had probably killed Oliver's mother. Why would Oliver be safe? 2 weeks into summer, Claire stopped hearing from Oliver. Derek wasn't answering calls, wasn't responding to texts, was within his rights to limit contact during his custody time, but Claire was panicking. She drove to Derek's apartment in Tacoma, knocked, no answer, looked through windows, no one home. She called Derek's work. They said he'd taken vacation time, 3 weeks, didn't say where he was going. Claire called police, reported Oliver missing. They said he wasn't missing, was with his father, legal custody. Unless there was evidence of danger, they couldn't intervene. Claire called her lawyer. Lawyer filed emergency motions. Judge wouldn't hear it for a week. Scheduled court time. Couldn't bump other cases. Claire called me sobbing. Said Oliver was gone. Derek had taken him. Disappeared. She'd been right to be afraid. I called Detective Garza. Asked if he could do anything. He said his hands were tied. Derek hadn't broken any laws. Was allowed to travel with his son. Unless Claire had proof of danger, police couldn't act. 3 days later, Claire got a call. Unknown number. She answered. It was Oliver. Crying. Whispering. Said Daddy was acting scary. They were at a cabin somewhere. No other people. Just woods. Derek kept talking about Mommy. About how she'd tried to keep them apart. How she'd deserved what happened. How they'd be together now. Just the two of them. Forever. Oliver said he was scared. Wanted to come home. The line went dead. Claire tried calling back. Number blocked. She called police immediately. Played them the recording. They took it seriously now. Put out alerts. Tracked the phone number. Burner phone. Purchased with cash. No way to trace. But the call had pinged off a cell tower in North Cascades National Park. Remote area. Hundreds of cabins. Forest Service started searching. Police helicopters. Ground teams. Looking for Derek's car. A gray sedan. Plates registered to Derek Morse. Claire and I drove up there. Joined the search. Spent 3 days hiking trails. Checking cabins. Finding nothing. On day 4, a ranger found Derek's car. Abandoned at a trailhead. Empty. No sign of Derek or Oliver. K9 units tracked their scent into the forest. Deep. Miles from any road. They were on foot. Running. Or hiding. Police called it a manhunt now. Amber Alert issued. Derek's photo everywhere. Described as armed and dangerous. Flight risk. Possible parental abduction. Media picked it up. National news. The story had everything. Dead mother. Suspicious circumstances. Custody battle. Missing child. Claire did interviews. Begged Derek to bring Oliver back. Said he'd get help. Treatment. Just please don't hurt Oliver. Detective Garza led the investigation. Said they'd found evidence in Derek's apartment. A journal. Detailed plans. Derek had been planning this for months. Since losing primary custody. Wrote about taking Oliver somewhere they'd never be found. Starting over. Becoming new people. The journal also contained confessions. About Rebecca. About the insulin. About making it look like suicide. He'd done it. Killed her. Admitted it in writing. But only to himself. Probably never meant for anyone to read it. But now police had it. Had proof. Had a murder case. If they found Derek alive. 6 days into the search, a hiker called 911. Found a body. Adult male. Derek's description. Remote area. Near a cliff. Police recovered the body. Confirmed identity. Derek Morse. Dead. Appeared to be a fall. Trauma consistent with hitting rocks. But no Oliver. Search intensified. Where was he? Had Derek hurt him before falling? Had Oliver witnessed it? Was he alive out there, scared, alone, or worse? Claire was beside herself, screaming. Couldn't breathe. I stayed with her. Held her up. Police brought in more teams. Searched a 5-mile radius from Derek's body. Used thermal imaging. Drones. Dogs. Nothing. Days passed. Hope faded. They were searching for a body now. No child could survive this long in the wilderness. No food, no water, no shelter. If Derek had hurt him, if he'd fallen somewhere, if animals had... Claire couldn't finish the thoughts. Just prayed. Begged. Bargained with God. Universe. Anyone listening. On day 9, a search dog alerted near a stream. 2 miles from Derek's body. Different direction. Police found a small cave. Really just an overhang. Inside was Oliver. Alive. Barely. Dehydrated. Hypothermic. Unconscious. But alive. They rushed him to hospital. Called Claire. She met them there. Oliver was in ICU. Critical condition. But stable. Doctors said another day and he'd have died. He'd been drinking stream water. Eating berries. Trying to survive. Waiting for rescue. When he woke up, he told police what happened. Derek had brought him to the cabin. Kept him there. Talked about Mommy. About staying together forever. Oliver got scared. Tried to call Aunt Claire. Derek caught him. Got angry. Said they had to leave. They started hiking. Derek was talking crazy, about Mommy deserving it, about how he'd made it look perfect. Nobody would ever know. They walked for hours. Oliver was tired, scared. Then, Derek slipped, near the cliff edge, fell, screamed. Oliver watched him disappear, heard the impact far below. Oliver ran, didn't know where, just away, found the cave, hid, waited, thought rescue would come. Days passed. He got weaker, hungrier, thought he'd die like Daddy, like Mommy, alone, but kept hoping, kept waiting, until the dog found him. Claire held Oliver in that hospital bed and sobbed. Relief, grief, rage, everything at once. Oliver was safe, alive, but scarred forever. Had watched his father confess to killing his mother, then watched him die. 6 years old, and he'd experienced more trauma than most people face in a lifetime. The therapists said recovery was possible, but it would take years, maybe decades. Oliver would need intensive treatment, support, love. Claire said she'd give him everything, whatever he needed, for as long as he needed it. She'd make sure he knew he was wanted, loved, safe, that what happened wasn't his fault, that he'd survived, that he was brave. Detective Garza closed Rebecca's case, ruled homicide. Derek Morse identified as perpetrator. Case cleared by death of suspect. Justice served, sort of. Derek was dead, would never stand trial, never face Rebecca's family, never be held accountable in any real way. But at least everyone knew the truth. Rebecca hadn't killed herself, had been murdered by the man she'd tried to escape, the man the system had protected, the man who'd gotten chance after chance until he'd killed. Claire filed wrongful death suits against Derek's estate, against the court system that had ignored Rebecca's pleas, against the police who'd treated restraining orders like suggestions. Some settled, some were dismissed. Money didn't matter, wouldn't bring Rebecca back, but maybe it would change policies, protect the next woman, save the next life. Claire established a foundation in Rebecca's name, advocated for domestic violence victims, pushed for better laws, stricter enforcement, real consequences for abusers. She turned her rage into purpose, her grief into action. Oliver moved in with Claire permanently, started 3rd grade in Tacoma, went to therapy 3 times a week, made slow, steady progress, had good days and bad days, would still wake up screaming sometimes, would still check locks obsessively, would still flinch at loud noises, but he smiled sometimes too, played with other kids, talked about Mommy without crying every time, was learning to live with the weight he'd carry forever. Claire called me occasionally, updated me, said Oliver asked about me sometimes, the neighbor who'd helped him that night, who'd stayed when he was scared. I visited a few times, brought Oliver books, played board games, tried to be another stable adult in his orbit, another person who showed up, who cared. It wasn't much, but it was something. 2 years after that night, I moved to a different apartment building. Couldn't walk past 3F anymore without seeing blood, without hearing Oliver's small voice, without remembering how close evil had been to my door. But I kept Claire's number, kept the promise to show up for Oliver's birthdays and holidays, kept fighting alongside her for the laws that might save the next Rebecca, knowing we'd never save enough, but refusing to stop trying, because that night taught me that being a good person isn't about being a hero. It's about answering the door when a child knocks covered in blood and never closing it again. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.